Well, speaking of the military, I mean, so on the
Yeah,
one hand, the soldiers are getting harassed with requirement of taking the vaccine. The soldier who spoke out after Afghanistan's debacle and after 13 members of the American Armed Forces died due to a bombing that was attributed in part to the failure to properly withdraw forces from the region. A lieutenant colonel spoke out about it rather famously on social media, was critical of what had happened and said, he was willing to give up his retirement that he was just a few years away from, his 20-year pension, because he just couldn't stay quiet anymore. And it's not like he was particularly political, because he was very critical of the Trump administration as well. He was critical across the board of how the hierarchy and military establishment had operated, and said there needs to be accountability, and I feel I have to speak out or accountability won't happen. After witnessing 20 years, really, of disaster in Afghanistan, he'd spent a large amount of
and
time there.
worth noting is that I think at least one of the casualties was a friend of his that when he posted his first video that went viral, I think it was the night of or the day after, and couldn't disclose the name even though he knew because their relatives had not been informed. So personally affected, take that to, whichever way you want. Personally affected, put up a video. I think we've all watched it at this point. I don't know what was objectionable about the first video. When I first heard the story, Robert, I thought he had disclosed confidential information. I thought he had disclosed classified information. I didn't realize it was basically just a member of the military in uniform, seemingly in office, vocalizing many of the same questions that the rest of the world had. The same questions we had discussed. Oh, geez, I forgot their names. We did the live stream with the two guys. Robert, you'll get their names, but same questions.
For the Duran.
The Duran, sorry. Same questions we've been asking for months. Just chain of command. Who made these decisions to abandon an airfield? There's no accountability. There was nothing classified in there. So the first video went viral. Then apparently he was put on a gag order, which I don't understand how they issue a gag order when I didn't understand what the what pending lawsuit there was or issue that could have been the object of a gag order. And he continued being critical, but as far as I knew, never disclosed any classified confidential information, and now is in the brig. And for anyone who doesn't know what the brig is, do you know what the origin of the word is? Me neither. Damn it, I should have looked it up. Anyways, he's in military prison. And Robert, how, why, what did he do wrong? And I know he hasn't been charged with anything yet.
I think he has been. No.
Oh, okay. Last I checked, he hadn't. But what would be the charges?
So the issue is in the military's application of the First Amendment, and because courts in America have taken a hands-off approach to the military. So there's both the U.S. Supreme Court and the military courts recognize that the Constitution completely protects soldiers like it protects anyone else. It protects any members of the military, but some of our military fans in the audience remind me there's airmen, there's sailors, there's Marines, and then there's Army soldiers. So I think of them all as soldiers, but they do go by different labels. So the entering the danger zone, I guess you could say, from Top Gun or Archer, depending on your cultural reference. Because of that, the Supreme Court has said yes, this applies. The Court of Military Appeals and says yes, this applies in our military court justice system. However, the U.S. Supreme Court has also said when it comes to the military, we're mostly going to be hands off. We're not going to meaningfully supervise or scrutinize whether the military is violating their members' constitutional liberties, which I think is I've never agreed with that premise. I was like, if we wanted a military exemption of the Constitution, it would already be in there. It wasn't like our founders had no idea of the necessity of military discipline. It's that they chose not to include any military exemption from the Constitution because they knew that was a lot more dangerous than having such an exemption. But our courts have ignored that because they're corrupted at a certain level in deferring to other institutions of power. And not meaningfully enforcing constitutional liberties. So the only reason why this guy could be in the brig at all is because our federal court system imposes no meaningful supervision over the military. And the military often doesn't impose constitutional protections on itself. It acknowledges they exist, but it's issued a string of decisions. I mean, up until the 1950s, the military pretended there were no rights of their own members. Then started to recognize, okay, I guess we have to that would be kind of crazy if you somehow lost your citizenship because you were enrolled in the military. That wasn't part of the bargain. And so started to recognize it, but put limits on it. And really what it comes down to is everybody agrees the legal standard is that the military cannot limit the speech of its members unless the speech of its members poses a clear and present danger to the ability of the military to do its job for national security purposes. The problem is that the military courts have almost never strictly applied that. They find every excuse in the world. I mean, they once disciplined people for talking at a picnic about the Vietnam War. I mean, amongst themselves, soldiers talking amongst themselves. They dishonorably discharged several of those soldiers, members of the military, and they upheld it on just, because their interpretation was, it could undermine discipline. Well, that's not what was the clear and convincing, the clear and present danger standard is supposed to be something that goes to the inability of the military to function. This, in my view, this lieutenant colonel's criticism of the military establishment is precisely what should be protected. That did not jeopardize discipline within the military. That did not endanger functionality of the military. That did not endanger national security. Just the opposite. By holding these leaders accountable, maybe we can actually be more secure, more safe, and more efficient. And what's happened is the military courts have distorted the rules to really mean if you offend powerful people, we're going to call that a clear and present danger to national security, not if what you're doing actually does that. But that's what he faces. And so they charged him with there's these generic charges, contempt charges, contempt of officers charges, you name it.
And the article is from Military Times. It seems to be a few days old, but it says, just quoting the article, the general nature of the offense is being considered. So I guess this is back old news. Article 32. The general offense is being considered at the Article 32 hearing. Article 88, contempt towards officials. Contempt, showing disrespect.
Man, if that was a general crime, I would never get out of prison.
Article 90, willfully disobeying superior commissioned officer. I guess that's the gag order, but I don't understand how they issued the gag order.
What it is because they're calling it a lawful order. So what they do is in these circumstances, they don't like what you're saying. So they issue an order to say you can't say anything anymore. And purportedly, that's a lawful order. To me, that's not a lawful order. That needed to be limited to things that pose an imminent risk to discipline, to the security and capability of the military. And again, they tend to conflate saying something bad about the people at the top with messing up with discipline. When the reason why there's disciplinary issues currently of effectiveness of the military is because the people at the top have not been held accountable. Consider this. This guy's sitting in the brig for just telling the truth about what happened in the military hierarchy, while Joint Chief of Staff General Milley admitted in Congress this week that he tipped off the Chinese government and guaranteed them he would tip them off if there was ever a planned attack on their country. I mean, that's actual treason, as close to actual treason as you get politically.
And now, Robert, because it's a good segue into the third charge, Article 133, conduct unbecoming of an officer and a gentleman. And if giving the heads up to your actual existential political military adversary is not conduct unbecoming of an officer and a gentleman, I don't know what is. Stuart Scheller put out Facebook posts, videos, which, I mean, no swearing, no expletives, no threats, no nothing. It was critique and asking the very same questions that everyone else with half a brain and half a consciousness as to what's going on in the world have been asking for months. And I guess the only issue is that it's more insulting. It's more of the stinging nature of the truthful
question. It's who he questioned. That's what they're calling insulting. That's what they're calling unbecoming conduct. That's what they're calling dangerous to national security. It's that he insulted the hierarchy, because that's who he insulted. That's who his focus was. It was these people need to be held accountable, because right now for 20 years they haven't been. And for just speaking truth, it's a writer at the American Thinker compared it to the Dreyfus affair, which is very much what it's like. I mean, people who don't know that there was a high-ranking French officer who was part of the old school French aristocratic elite, who, like most of the military hierarchy, who was selling out secrets to the Germans, and that under French efforts, military efforts. But they said that couldn't possibly be the case. So they found one of the few Jewish officers, blamed him. A intelligence officer figured this all out, exposed it to the military hierarchy. So they tried to railroad him instead of come to terms with it. And when Emile Zola wrote about it, Jacques, great article, great book, great title, they tried to put him in jail instead. It was only a decade later that we have a very corrupt military hierarchy. And what this soldier, this lieutenant colonel, did was say, we've got a big problem that's going to keep reoccurring, that's going to lead to disaster around the world, the death of Americans and the death of others around the world, unless we hold this hierarchy accountable and, frankly, just do a mass firing of them. He didn't call for the latter part. That's my own addition, my edit. And he's the one they're trying to lock up. It shows how dysfunctional our system is. We look like the French military at the end of the 19th century.
Or I mean, I don't even know, just a banana republic where some people were hypothesizing, and rightfully so. It's like, what is this going to do to the motivation for anyone to get into the military, seeing the way that they will throw under the bus, and utterly destroy? We saw what they did to Flynn. You saw what they do to anyone who becomes the enemy. But what does this do for inspiring anyone to join the forces, other than deter them to do so? And what is going to be the impact of that in 5 to 10 years for what was, for the last ever, the global superpower? What's it going to do to that military over the long run?
It's a triple boom, because first they did this political purge, looking at anybody who's said anything supportive that they didn't like under the name of race theory or whatever other nonsense that they were looking at that Milley was preaching about. That was part one. Then so everybody's been subject to interrogation on their political beliefs and attempted purge based on their political beliefs. Second, they've been subject to this mass vaccination campaign on a rushed basis for people who are simply not at risk from this virus, and with a vaccine that more than a few have objections to for religious or medical or personal reasons, that they're being forced to take without getting any due process. And then on top of this, any soldier who speaks out, they're sticking in the brig. They're trying to do to the military what led to the French military being such a joke. There's a reason why, World War I, World War II, the French should have just put an American flag up, because we're the only reasons they still exist as a country.
It's amazing for anybody. I guess this is the first movie reference in a while, but the movie Killing Zoe with Eric Stoltz and the French actor, I forget who it was. It was written by Quentin Tarantino, I think. Super violent bank robbery movie. And there was that one joke where there's the bank robbery in a French bank, and there's the one, stereotypically loud American who says to the French guy holding the gun, is like, if it weren't for you, you'd always speak in German, and then he gets shot. But it's a funny thing, like the French losing wars and losing the First World War and the Second World War has become a meme before memes existed. I never for once stopped to think as to how the French army actually was so weak when it became so weak.
A French army that was dominant for centuries. Under Napoleon, almost succeeded in building a massive empire. It was because they allowed this elite hierarchy to take over, and it got so corrupt, it ultimately killed it. And we're seeing all the signs of that corruption at the military hierarchy. And this lieutenant colonel was the canary in the coal mine, saying we've got major problems. That's why it wasn't even political criticism. It wasn't like he was saying yes Biden, no Trump, no Biden, yes Trump. It wasn't politically motivated at all. He was critical of the hierarchy all the way through all these administrations. And he was like, it doesn't change. It doesn't matter who's at the top. We have continued incompetence at the top because there's never accountability. And what happens is ordinary people die over and over and over again. And if we want to stop that, we've got to hold these hierarchy people accountable.
Yeah, and he said, like people asking him, did all of those military servicemen, I say servicemen, did all of the military people who died over the last 20 years die in vain, given the way they withdrew? And he says, yeah, unless, I don't want to say heads roll, because that might be a dog whistle to some, unless there's some accountability for what happened, everyone who died in Afghanistan over the last 20 years will have died in vain, given the awful, hasty, botched manner in which they withdrew, And I guess that irks some people the wrong way, but it's
I guess Milley doesn't mind since he's such a fan of China. I mean, China's now taking over Bagram Air Force Base in Afghanistan this week. The Taliban brought him in. So we have a traitor at the top. That's the reality.
Marcus Horn says, can you ask Barnes, if we remove the corrupt military officials, can we be sure they won't be replaced by equally corrupt people singing the same song?
Well, there needs to be institutional reform and wide, robust protection of rights. That needs to go with it.
I hate these headphones. Does anyone notice them anymore? I feel like a nerd, so to speak. But I mean, it's depressing. So he's in jail, by the way. He's got representation. I think he's got
raised over $2 million for him.
2 million. Okay, last I heard was 200,000. I guess I'm reading an article that's a couple days old. So he's got meaningful crowdfunding. If anybody has a link to the crowdfunding for him, please put it in the link and I'll pin it to the comment, pinned comment when this is over. So
credit to his parents on this, because he has been isolated, not allowed to even talk to his parents during this time period.
It's just terrible. You see the parents talking. This is a man who's been serving for 17 years, not just unblemished, but a commendable record, and not to compare him to other people who've been prosecuted. Just somebody who has been in there long enough and given enough of their own actual blood, sweat, and tears, and seen enough of their blood, sweat, and tears of their friends and their loved ones be sacrificed and spilled for this process, comes out and talks about it. And instead of addressing it, and instead of saying, yeah, we screwed up and maybe we actually have to go right things, go punish the person who's easy to punish, because, you know, but for social media, but for crowdfunding, he'd be in the brig with who knows what lawyer and who knows what means to defend himself. So at the very least, he has that. So thank goodness for small. And he's a husband and a father, which is also not irrelevant in terms of what people are willing to sacrifice for what they believe.
He already forfeited his retirement and an easy life. I mean, he could have just hung in there, said the nice stuff, get your pension, sell out to the defense industry like the Milley types do, get really rich with defense contractors, and just play ball. And he spoke out because he realized more and more people are going to die unless somebody did. And so that's not a breach of military discipline. That's a recognition of military discipline. And so it's a crime that the military has put him in the brig, and it shows how much the whole hierarchy needs to be purged of its position.
Purged politically. Don't want anyone taking anything out of context here. We mean this. Right. This is just
mass fired the way they're firing real heroes like nurses and firemen right now.
And by mass fired, Robert means from losing their jobs. No other means of fire.
Yeah, indeed.
All right. I try to be tongue in cheek, but it is very depressing. It's depressing on the one hand that things get to this point. It's depressing on the other hand that people standing up for these people get demonized and things will get deliberately misrepresented for the sake of politics. This man is sitting in, at one point, it's isolation or solitary confinement for social media posts, for a gag order pertaining to nothing in particular. And if you listen to what he said, he wasn't saying anything novel. It was just that it was coming from someone of a position of authority and not from social media at large. And yes, he was wearing his military uniform and doing it on site, which I guess, look, in fairness, when the person came out and criticized Tucker Carlson, I forget who that military guy was, it's like, yeah, don't do it in uniform because it looks like intimidation. The difference here is that this wasn't a superior, threatening.
Yeah, this guy was aiming up, not aiming down.
Punching up and not punching down, and punching up within the infrastructure and not punching down from the military infrastructure to the media infrastructure. And if those distinctions aren't enough for you, none will be. And I say not you, Robert, but the world. None will be.